we regret and we apologize for the title of this first in the series, an internationally acceptable election in Zimbabwe. Because the election must be first and foremost acceptable to the people of the country concerned, to the region, the continent, and of course the international community. Nevertheless, the question is there, is this possible in the current context of Zimbabwe? And as I said early on, to help us in this discussion, we'll have Philani Zamchia give us an overview, and then Barbara Bebe from the Electoral Resource Center, and Ian Borodema from ZESEN. The ERC and ZESEN will be key partners in this process as we go forward with the various sessions that we shall have. We will also be bringing to play people from South Africa, from Zambia and Malawi, and indeed from the international community, to try and inform our discussion, both in terms of educating Zimbabweans about the electoral process, but also as a basis of trying to ensure that if elections are held, they are really held in terms of universally accepted criteria. So, and I'll call upon Philani Zamchia to kick off for us.
Thank you, Professor Ibomandaza. It has been a long day indeed, just coming out of another international conference. We are in Cape Town. It's freezing. I thought it wouldn't be freezing this time of the year. But thanks for the invitation. And thank you, colleagues, for attending. I see that there are people who are actually more knowledgeable than me in this room. So perhaps my duty is just to open up points of debate. I just, got this question: is Zimbabwe ready for internationally acceptable elections? And Professor Ibomandaza has already clarified that what we need to do perhaps is to say, is Zimbabwe ready for a local, regional, and international acceptable democratic election? And the answer, in my view, is no. Why? I think the political environment is only ripe for an undemocratic election until something fundamental happens. I think for Zimbabwe, or any constitutional democracy for that matter, to get a relatively free and fair election, there is need to build like local, regional, and international consensus towards a chain of democratic choice. But then the question is, what would constitute Zimbabwe's chain of democratic choice at this juncture? And I am arguing that it must have 5 premise conditions or pillars. That is 1, information; 2, inclusion; 3, insulation; 4, integrity; and 5, irreversibility. I think these are 5 I's maybe that we can use to assess whether Zimbabwe is ready for a general election next year. So maybe I can start by talking about information, which is 1 pillar. And I think it's obvious for many people in this room that a democratic election entails the free formation of voter preferences. So citizens obviously need to have access to both aspiring candidates and their policies. But for this to happen, people must have access to the plural sources of information. And as also need for candidates to have equal access to the public space. Is there equal access to public space in Zimbabwe today? No. If candidates were not given to stay it broadcasting cooperation, the Chronicle, the Sunday News. We must see working on civil rights who have
Sorry,
been having limited access to public.
You're breaking very badly. I don't know what's wrong with the network there. Yeah, you're breaking.
Maybe
Hello?
Turn off your video. Turn off your video, Phil.
Am I still breaking?
Yeah. Just turn off your video.
Is it better now?
Yes.
So where did you lose me?
Yeah, we're hearing you, but you're in a broken form.
Okay. Yeah. So I was talking about the 5 I's, and I was talking now about information, and that we should look held by elections, which are also ongoing in some form, whereby all the opposition candidates haven't been given equal access to state media. Whether we think of it as Herald, ZBC, Chronicle.
You've disappeared now. You've disappeared. Hello? 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 Zamchia? Zamchia?
I hope he hasn't been hit by a South African power cut. Yeah, he's gone here, but I don't quite understand why.
Yeah, even on WhatsApp.
Back. Hello, yeah, I think I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. What did happen? What did happen?
I don't know what's happening here. I won't dramatize it. Let me try to continue, but if I'm real, then you can carry it off.
Okay, carry on.
Maybe just.
Yeah, let me just carry on and see how far, but be free to tell me when I'm not being audible. So I was still on the first pillar, that is information. That is not just about the opposition leaders, but also about civil society doing work on political and civil rights. They are also having limited access to public space. And this is not being covered as much as it should be in the media. Because every time you see civil society activists and opposition leaders on national television, it's when they are being excoriated. It is clear from this one premise pillar of Zimbabwe's chain of democratic choice, that of information, is still broken at this juncture. So second pillar, which is inclusion. be they legal. We are seeing all the kind of laws, the kind of bills that the state is trying to introduce, like your PVO bill to curtail civil society and so forth, or even ones to universal suffrage, as we have seen during the voter registration process. So do all the citizens have the equal right to participation? I think if we look at the Citizens Coalition for Change, which looks like the most credible option at the moment, or it has been banned from holding campaign rallies in many rural areas. Let's think of Gokwe, let's think of Kondo and Pinge, and so forth. And civil faced similar bans from exercising its constitutional obligations. If you look at the coalition, they have a case in court at the moment. They are challenging the state for denying it the right to hold a peaceful march. So here we have the second link to Zimbabwe's chain of democratic choice, that of inclusion, which also appears to be broken. And then the third is insulation. At once the citizens have formed their preferences and attained to participate in the election through registration, they must be able to express their choice freely. And the use of the secret vote, I think it comes hand in this context, because it's meant even internationally to insulate people from outside pressure, undue influence, intimidation, threats, coercion, and even bribery. Are the people of Zimbabwe insulated at the moment? Let me showcase that it seems that the majority of people are not insulated, because I've been looking at from January 2022, and it actually signals a surge in violence and human rights violations. And in that kind of first quarter to half of the year, the three top perpetrators of the violence during this period were: one, ZANU-PF members, who accounted for 45.04% of the violations. Then second, the Zimbabwe Republic Police, which was responsible for 33.1%, yes, of the human rights violations. Then the third is the municipal police with 5.4%. They have been chasing people trying to eke a livelihood in the informal markets. On the lower scale, the Citizens Coalition for Change, led by Nelson Chamisa, was responsible for only 1.73% of cases. And if we look at the MDC Alliance, led by Douglas Monzora, it was responsible for 0.15% of these cases. So what we have is that you have two institutions in the day-to-day livelihood, ZANU and ZRP, accounting for 78.14% of violations. Yeah, and I think there's a significant issue here, that the involvement of ZRP in about a third of the violations actually shows the visible role of the state, and tends to counter this narrative that we get, things like opposition party versus the ruling party. There's involvement of the state here, which I think is very important. I think many scholars I see in this room, including our chair here, Ibo Mandas, I see Brian Raftopoulos, Miles, I hope it's Miles 20. You know, they've actually shown this symbiotic relationship between ZANU-PF and state security institutions. And to me, that is inimical to a democratic election. And these main perpetrators, they're actually targeting ordinary citizens mainly. It accounts for about 95%. And a few hardcore CCC, for Coalition for Change party cadres. Like, if you look at the Job Scara, if you look at Godfrey Stole, they are both members of parliament, and also women. Look at the cases of Joanna Mamombe, Cecilia Chinembiri, and Netsai Maroa, OCCC activists, amongst many others. But nevertheless, I think ZANU-PF is actually desperate to advance the proposition that it is the opposition party, CCC, in its resurgence, that is responsible for political violence. So I'm not surprised that ZANU-PF is now working with the same ZRP and other intelligence security departments to prepare fake dossiers, implementing the opposition in violence, but with a specific purpose to hoodwink the region. I had my sources in the DRC telling me that that was one line that the president of Zimbabwe was repeating, that we have got an opposition party that is very violent, that also now wants to go underground because it doesn't want to constitute itself formally, so that there's a danger. So it's kind of also preparing the region and the international community in terms of what might happen to the opposition. And we're also seeing trumped up charges of murder against trade unions, the case of Obed Masaraure, and so forth. This is not unsubstantiated in my view, because if you look at Constantino Chiwenga, who is the deputy president of the country, he promised to crush a few months ago, to crush the opposition like flies, till even a fly can no longer recognize it. You know, this was the same way, if we look historically, that Robert Mugabe promised to crush Joango, PF ZAPU, with no response from international community. But one can also kind of deduce victimization from the ruling party militia and traditional leaders, some traditional leaders in the rural hinterland. So people are living in fear with no insulation. And this reminds me of the late Morgan Tsvangirai, whom I interviewed in 2017. And he explained this to me. He said, I traversed the breadth and length of rural Zimbabwe in early 2017. The people are aware of the challenges that affect them. Most want a change of government. However, the biggest problem is fear. They are afraid to vote for the opposition. The fear factor is the greatest stumble. Before the opposition come out with a strategy to deal with the fear factor, it is going to be difficult. It is from this interview whereby I conceptualized this as harvest of fear in my political works. So fast forward, you know, has anything changed in terms of insulating the citizens? Communities remain convinced that the 2023 elections are going to be a nightmare. There's a recent report which came out this year, the State of Peace, which reads that there was consensus of all the communities that participated in the report, in the research, that elections presented a nightmare rather than an opportunity. Many community members are expecting bloodshed ahead of the 2023 election. They attribute the violence to violent nature of the ruling party. So again, this is kind of evidence that one link to Zimbabwe's chain of democratic choice that I'm proposing, that of insulation, is broken. Then the fourth is about integrity. And this is about the professionalism, independence, and competence of electoral institutions, you know, such as the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, other management institutions, but including the judiciary. I was very happy to see that Arnold Tsunga is here, because the judiciary is also an important aspect of this electoral process. These institutions must be at the center of the integrity of any democratic election in order to avoid institutional bias in the management of the elections. So those in charge of management of elections must also be able to demonstrate that they equally treat the contesting candidates and their supporters. So a democratic election in 2023 should therefore take place within the confines of an autonomous, non-partisan, and independent institution that enjoys the confidence of the citizenry and the contesting parties. Is this reflective of Zimbabwe today? You know, a paltry 38% of Zimbabweans trust ZEC. Again, the recent State of Peace report by Zimrise found that communities have no confidence in electoral systems' capacity to deliver democracy. Many are convinced that the election outcome is predetermined because the institutions are captured. And this confidence is also eroded because of the continued militarization of ZEC. Chigumba, the chairperson of ZEC, acknowledged, that was in February 2018, that close to 15% of the ZEC permanent secretariat of 383 members then had a military background. But she said she saw nothing wrong with that. And more recently, on the 22nd of January, 2022, Chigumba was also adamant that will continue to employ the members of the security sector during an interview she had with ZTN because no law bars them. However, there's a history of conflation of this ruling party and the military, and it has deep historical roots. I'm therefore inclined on this matter to agree with Professor Masunungure, who argues that under Mnangagwa's rule, we have the security sector controlling state institutions. Everyone knows the role that the army played in the 2017 coup that ousted Mugabe. Given those circumstances, when ex-members constitute a significant number of the electoral management board workforce, members of the public are then forced to ask questions of impartiality and credibility of ZEC. In law, for sure, ZEC cannot bar them, but from the public perception, it is problematic. So here again, another link to my proposed Zimbabwe's chain of democratic choice, that of integrity, is broken. And then finally, is the pillar, is irreversibility as a pillar. I think that winners of any election must be able to take state power and exercise their power in line with the constitutional term limits. Hence, an election must be decisive ex ante as well as irreversible ex post. And to me, once this happens, then Zimbabwe's chain of democratic choice flourishes. And norm violations, to irreversibility can include: one, stopping winners of the ballot from taking state power in 2023. This has happened to Tsvangirai in 2008 and arguably to Chamisa in 2018. Or two, allowing the winners to take power, then frustrate their operations through tutelage. So Chamisa, who is the most likely candidate from the opposition groupings to win, can be allowed to get state power, but under conditions that he literally becomes a hostage of the military, with the military being the guardian not only of him, but as they believe that they are the guardians of the sovereign interests of the post-colonial state in Zimbabwe. And three, the norm violations can include masterminding a coup before the constitutional rights of the winner is over. So the opposition can get in, but there can be another coup. As we have read all over the world, a coup usually begets another coup. So are Zimbabweans certain of irreversibility of the vote in 2023 if they happen to vote for the opposition? The answer to me is most unlikely, if not a straight no. Not until the military coup is cured. And it is not likely to be cured through, in my view, a general election held by the same institutions. And now, in the absence of these five eyes I've spoken about, it is therefore not surprising to hear ZANU-PF senior officials like Patrick Chinamasa saying, I quote, "As far as we are concerned, 2023 election is a foregone conclusion. In fact, it's over before the people vote," unquote. So to me, this signals elections characterized by procedural uncertainty and outcome certainty. Fortunately, Professor Ibo, as I was talking about Zambia managed to back this trend because the integrity of the institutions actually prevailed. And we can even think also of America, whereby Donald Trump allegedly tried to call Georgia to say, no, you need to find me 11,000 votes and so forth. And in that context, the integrity of the institutions also prevailed. But Zimbabwe's context is that it's signaling a political ritual in 2023 or a political theater meant to legitimize the incumbent. And we have witnessed that on the African continent in Djibouti, in Chad, Uganda, the Republic of Congo. And in Zimbabwe, this is going to be exacerbated by two factors. First is the militarized politics, which is prevailing in Zimbabwe. And on the African continent, Togo, Sudan, Mali, and Egypt confirm that militarized politics is an anathema to electoral democracy. And second, and interrelated, is the big man politics trumping institutions in Zimbabwe. You know, we have seen that governance by strong men has failed to deliver electoral democracy in Africa. Basago of Equatorial Guinea in power for 41 years. He had a sham election in 2016 where he said he got 93.7% of the vote. You look at El Sisi of Egypt, he held a sham election as well in 2018 with a dramatic 97% win. Go to Cameroon, Paul Biya in power for 38 years. He had another phone election in 2018. He should be 89 years old now. And Paul Kagame of Rwanda, a strong man on the continent, also seems allergic to electoral democracy. Now in Zimbabwe, you have got this new strong man, Mnangagwa, who has shown no penchant for genuine democratic reforms, despite his promises when he took over power. As the country now heads for another political ritual in 2023, disguised as a general election. Let me conclude for the sake of time by saying that I think it is important to look at the 5 I's that I've proposed as analytic and prescriptive lens. Analytic in this sense, to help practitioners to assess whether Zimbabwe is ready for a relatively democratic election, constitutionally due in 2023. And prescriptive maybe in the sense that it can help practitioners to build local, regional, and international consensus that the 5 I's, information, inclusion, integrity, insulation, and irreversibility constitute Zimbabwe's chain of democratic choice. And to make sure that whatever political transitional arrangements and or reforms prioritize investment in the 5 I's. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Philani Zamchia. Devastating account. We're worried that your technology there might have let us down, but you have really come through. And you have, in doing so, you have really set at the frame of the discussion, not only for today, but in the 9 sessions that follow in subsequent months. And I just wonder what we can say any more than you have said already in this discussion. You have laid out the prerequisites for a free and fair election in Zimbabwe, and devastatingly demonstrated that we don't have any of those 5 pillars yet. On the contrary, all the indications are that we are in for a disastrous 2023 election, unless and until, as you have said in your concluding remarks, we attend analytically and prescriptively to the 5 pillars. Thank you very much. I think this is most informative. As devastating as it is, I think it helps to highlight, and I see some of our, I was on a discussion this morning with Joan Brickhill and colleagues at Salo. I hope, Joan, that Zamchia's account has answered some of the issues raised this morning. So now we turn to ERC, to Barbara Bebe. I hope Barbara is not too intimidated by Zamchia's outline.
Not at all.
Able to say something. Barbara,
okay.
please come.
Thank you so much, Ibo, for giving me the floor. Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Philani, for raising those very, pertinent issues from the political environment regarding whether or not Zimbabwe is ready for an election that will be acceptable both at the domestic level, at the regional level, and at the international level. In the morning, I did request for your presentation, Philani, and unfortunately, that wasn't ready for me. So for the purposes of this conversation, you allow me to actually go to my notes and to highlight. I'm going to refer to your presentation, but also just add to what you've already highlighted. I think our discussion for today, we need to frame it from the perspective that, from the point of view that a lot of recommendations that domestic, regional, and international observers gave after the 2018 elections remain unimplemented. And because of that, I think Zimbabwe is not really ready for the environment is not conducive for a free and fair election. So I'm going to highlight some of the issues that I think point to this fact. The first one is really the issue what Philani referred to as the integrity pillar from the 5 pillars that he shared with us today. So the issue concerns the pending alignment of the Electoral Act to the 2013 Constitution. For those that have been following developments, you probably are aware that the IMT developed a draft bill which took into consideration the recommendations from observers and the 2 bills that were drafted by civil society. This is the Veritas bill as well as the ZESNI bill. The model IMT Electoral Amendment Bill is currently under review by the Attorney General's office. But the bill itself, if it is passed into law, is going to help address some of the weaknesses in the electoral framework and also help to improve the integrity of the election. The second point or critical issue that I would like to raise here concerns the ZEC administration. That is issues regarding strengthening the independence of the Electoral Commission and the way that the Commission generally conducts itself. As Philani has already mentioned, there are contestations by political parties, or should I say the political class, in terms of the impartiality of ZEC. Some of the issues raised by observer missions concerning ZEC's conduct remain unaddressed. Like for instance, the ineffective continuous voter registration processes, lack of communication, or should I say effective communication with stakeholders, issues regarding voter education, where there is need for more comprehensive implementation of voter education, and the contentious issue around voter registration. We do know that ZEC has conducted voter registration blitz exercises in the past months to try and ramp up the statistics on voter registration, but the figures continue to be low, and there is need for ZEC to actually do that. But in addition to that, I think there are issues related to the integrity of the voters' roll itself. As the ERC, we did unearth several anomalies with the January 2022 voters' roll that was availed to political parties. And we note that when we approached ZEC, when we sent our recommendations to ZEC concerning some of the anomalies that we unearthed in the 2022 voters' roll, ZEC was not forthcoming in terms of actually talking to us and informing us in terms of how they were going to address those issues. So I think for an election, a credible election to be held, I think the voters' roll needs to be acceptable to stakeholders. We do know that no voters' roll is perfect, but at least it should meet some minimum conditions, and it should be availed to stakeholders. for audit purposes, so that stakeholders can also give recommendations to ZEC for it to be improved. I think that's one issue, that's another issue. And then the third issue really concerns deepening political polarization. And this is an issue that I think Philani discussed highlighted in his presentation at length. I think the role of the security in the application of newly introduced laws, such as the Maintenance of Peace and Order Act, is one issue that I would like to highlight. If we look at the by-elections, the recently held by-elections, the by-elections that were held in March, the opposition was the security forces. They used this law, the MPOA law, to actually restrict the opposition activities. And so there is need for the appropriate application of the law in order to create an environment that's conducive for all political players to campaign. We've also seen the treatment of politicians, this treatment of politicians actually compromises security in the sense that it can provoke violence when when the opposition, for instance, decides to retaliate due to that impartial, behavior from the security. There are issues related to vote buying, abuse of state resources, amongst others. Those are issues that really compromise the integrity of the election. And also, above everything else, the lack of accountability for human rights abuses and the excessive use of force by security agencies against civilians also kind of exacerbates existing tensions. I also would like to note that the recommendations from the Monclante, Commission, for instance, they remain unimplemented. Recommendations around getting those that perpetrated the violence to be accountable, to be held to account. And then the fourth issue that I would like to highlight concerns creating a level playing field and an environment that is conducive for an inclusive election campaign. Philani has already mentioned this, that the campaign environment is currently not level. He did highlight issues concerning the fact that the opposition is unable to campaign in rural areas, and the fact that civil society itself, we always forget civil society, the fact that civil society is also unable to conduct its activities freely. The recent case of the Crisis Coalition march, that was the Crisis Coalition meeting, prayer rally, that was stopped by the police. These are issues that compromise the credibility of an election. And then lastly, issues to do with media-related legal reforms. I think I will not dwell much on this because Philani in his presentation did speak to this at length under what he called the information pillar. But allow me to talk about this from the perspective of disinformation, that we need mechanisms for countering, disinformation. And this is important because if you go on Twitter, for instance, there's a lot of disinformation that is happening, and that in itself can actually compromise the integrity of an election, in the sense that if people are not getting accurate information, it can affect the electoral process. So that's one thing that perhaps at this platform we may need to discuss in terms of what can be done to challenge disinformation from the political players. And also another question that I would like to pose is concerns the security. Philani did highlight that the security, there is that conflation between ZANU-PF as a political party and the security sector, and that the security sector seems to be in control of the institution that is supposed to deliver the so-called, credible election, and that is supposed to manage all the electoral processes. So if that is the case, the question that I would like to pose is, what can be done? How can we build the citizens' confidence? Given that there are these personalities that we've already highlighted, the military in ZAC, and how can ZAC build its confidence, build citizen confidence in it as an institution, given that we are already saying that it is compromised because of the personalities or the individuals that are within that institution, and also because of the conflation between these key institutions, ZEC included, amongst the police also included, and other key institutions that are critical for the holding of free and fair elections. I think I'll just end here, but maybe let's just, I would be interested in hearing what we have to say about dealing with the security sector. How can we build the confidence, the public's confidence on ZEC? What can ZEC do, and what can civil society public confidence in that institution, or to push for a more for ZAC to be more accountable to the public? I think I'll end there.
Thank you, Barbara. You just helped to highlight problems that Zamchair had raised, and the question really is: what are we going to do about it? You talk about ZEC. You talk the militarization of politics. You talk about confidence. We are less than a year away from elections. Is there any hope that we can remedy these problems in time for the elections? And therefore, I have to ask Goredema from ZESN, Zimbabwe Electoral Support Network, an organization very central in the electoral process in terms of monitoring the process towards election. How do you see things in the light of what both Zamchair and Barbara have said? Goredema.
Well, thank you very much. I will also try not to open the video because I'm not sure, whether my internet is stable enough. Thanks a lot to the colleagues that spoke before me, Dr. Zamchair, Barbara. Thank you very much. I think you did a splendid job of giving us an expose of where things stand, in the likelihood of us having elections that can be accepted locally and also internationally. And I think after all this that has been said, allow me to sort of also summarize the important highlights that I think we should also speak to in the deliberations that will happen after the speakers are done. And then firstly, I think in what Barbara said and in what Dr. Zamchair also said, is very clear that there's something very wrong with our political culture, because political culture is what determines the standards or the norms that get to be accepted in a setting. And so there's something very wrong with the norms and the behaviors that our political actors find acceptable, because these are the ones that have led for us to be in situations whereby after key electoral processes, there is huge contestation. For me, the electoral framework is quite key in helping to support an election that can be regarded as an election that meets the critical integrity requiremements for a free and fair election. So yes, there are things that we need to work on in order to improve the quality of of electoral laws that are in place, but we cannot end with the electoral laws alone. We need to look beyond the electoral laws to include other critical pieces of legislation that need improvement. And as it stands, we really are falling behind in that regard, because after every electoral cycle, is what Barbara has already alluded to, there are a series of recommendations that are evidence-based that election observation missions always proffer to the different stakeholders in any election. And when you look at our own scenario in Zimbabwe, we have a raft of them. This, I think, summarized over 225 recommendations from electoral stakeholders, from electoral observation missions, and then summed them up into 115 recommendations. So very little has been done in terms of uptake by the relevant authorities of these recommendations. And what that points to is us getting into the 2023 elections without a significant improvement in the quality of laws that are in place, in the way that the election management body has been managing its processes when you compare with the previous electoral cycle. So that is quite a cause of concern. As this in this Barbara also alluded to, we tried to learn from the past, because it's a bad practice to introduce a raft of new laws on the eve of an election. So we started from 2018, in December 2018, to work on enlisting civil society and other stakeholders' views on what sections of the electoral laws need to be changed. And you can imagine from that time, there's really not been a significant movement in Parliament with regard to moving those amendments. Yes, there's significant and unprecedented consultations that have happened, but it appears there's no political will from the politicians themselves to see significant changes in the current laws. The speakers complained, the earlier speakers also complained about the conduct of critical stakeholders like the security services, the sector, their role in elections. And unfortunately, one of the important ingredients that was going to help change in the conduct of the security services is what the Constitution in its wisdom had suggested. You know, the setting up of an independent complaints mechanisms, you know, that allows for your ordinary citizens to be able to lodge complaints against the security sector's conduct whenever they feel that they are aggrieved. And so that hasn't happened. You know, Section 210 of the Constitution has not been operationalized, and that's an important component that needs to come on board, you know, for us to then be able to better rein in on the conduct of the uniformed forces, and also try to moderate their role and contribution in elections. I think we also agree that the role of traditional leaders has not necessarily been helpful in strengthening the integrity of our electoral processes. They've really played an outright partisan role in the manner in which they involve themselves in elections. And this is very sad. And again, the Constitution again suggested the setting up of the Ethics and Integrity committee for the traditional chiefs. And if this had been set up, you know, it will be easier also, I believe, to rein in on the conduct of traditional chiefs, because that committee would be given the mandate of making sure that the Traditional Leaders Act is adhered to. And so, unfortunately, like what the previous speakers have said, it's a gloomy picture that we have to paint, unfortunately, when we just look at what is currently obtaining. There's much work that needs to be done in very little time. Much that needs to be done to improve the quality of legislation that's available. We are aware that beyond the civil society model law or bill which we prepared, we know the ZEC itself is sought an audience with the Minister of Justice to try to get their own amendments considered ahead of next year's election. Unfortunately, the ZEC has not shared with the other stakeholders what these recommendations look like, but it's very clear that on either the side of the electoral stakeholders and also on the side of the commission, it's very clear everyone wants certain parts of the electoral law improved, some parts repealed, some parts amended. It's very clear that there is a consensus on that bit. But as to whether this will happen, whether significant amendments or reforms to the current act will happen ahead of 2023 is still something that we all wonder, because of the pace at which these conversations have moved. It appears we are moving around in circles, and time is fast running out because the window for seeing these amendments coming through is also closing. In as much as we may talk about improvements that need to be made to the existing legislation, I think it's also very clear that the conduct of the politicians, the political will to do what is right, to behave within the confines of the law, is also something that's very key. And it's also something that has been causing or eroding the quality of electoral processes in the country because of the many, I think, anecdotal pieces that the good doctor gave us about specific instances where political actors have been caught on the wrong side of the law, doing things that erode the confidence in electoral processes, and that erode the quality of electoral processes that are there. So this is the mix of things that we need to see coming through. Improvements at law, but more importantly, in my view, improvements in how politicians conduct themselves as they are going about canvassing for votes, as they are participating in elections. That is, I think, the one thing that is quite key. And so I'll throw this back to the meeting and say, so how do we then influence the political culture that is currently existing? Because it's the one that is toxic. It is one that is not being very helpful. So that's also something that I see is a key piece or key component that needs to change. So I hand over the mic back to you, Dr. Madas.
Thanks, Gorodema. Thanks very much. So here we have it. All three speakers, the last two echoing the first. We have, if there was an audit, the audit will be a very negative one. So at the end of this, I'll be asking the panelists, but especially ZESN and ERC, to answer the question that if by October, November, the audit shows that we cannot have a valid election, what do we do? Can we honestly come to the platform and say it clearly that we are not likely to have free and fair elections? And if not, what then? This is a question I'm going to raise, but I take it it's a question that all of us can consider now, as I invite you to make comments as you wish. You raise your hands and let's go. Yes, Tony, Rila. Tony.
Evening. Yep. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Ian. As a partner in this process with SAPES, I'll point out that Rao and SAPES have been working on elections for considerable time, certainly 2000 and 2018. And I think in that time, we've learned a number of things that are relevant and important right now, and probably more important than they've ever been. The first point I want to make is that it is indisputable that Zimbabwe is the most violent country in the region when it comes to elections. Philan raised those points quite clearly, but it makes us an outlier of a very serious kind. So that's incredibly important, and that really speaks to this whole notion that Philan raised on inclusion. And I posted a little bit of a report that Rao wrote recently on organized violence and torture in elections. And it's a very, very sorry tale. So we should not underestimate the problems of reducing inclusion. Not merely the organized violence and torture, but we also need to look at the ways in which the population is manipulated through clientelism and through patronage and through various other mechanisms. The second point relates to Phil's point about information, and in particular the closing off of civil society space. And here one has to talk very bluntly about the PVO Act. whose intention is quite clear, is to constrain and even eliminate the capacity of civil society and the human rights groups to be able to document the violence, intimidation, coercion that takes place during elections. Zimbabwean civil society has been exemplary in the way in which it is able to document the violations that take place. And it's quite clear, and any person who reads the PVO Act from its beginning a long time ago, never mind the completely egregious amendments to it, the intention was to stop us being able to influence elections in any particular way at all. The third point, and this is very important, and this is about irreversibility. And this links to the analysis that Jonathan Moyo did. Unfortunately, too few people have been able to read his book because it's not online. But the point he makes in the process of the 2018 elections is the centrality of the courts in able to influence the outcome of an election. It was an astounding constitutional court decision. It was brief, avoided the main issues, and in the end came to a decision about that election with complete consensus. And anybody who analyzes the behavior of the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court over the past decade or so will be under no illusion that when the court has to deal with deep and difficult political decisions, it is unanimous. Now, that in itself is a red flag. Judges never come to complete consensus. There's always a dissenting judgment or a point in limine. This court and our courts come to consensus without any demur. And that's a fundamental point about the whole thing about irreversibility, is the courts are a major problem. And then you come to some of the minor points. And the only one I want to raise right now, and this is one of these technical issues, is the whole issue of the voters' roll and the ability of citizens to interrogate their voters' roll. Now, we can tell you from Rao, from our own bitter experience, the difficulty in having the ability to analyze it is enormous. ZEC places enormous difficulties in the way of being able to scrutinize the voters' roll. In 2013, when we finally managed to get a copy of the voters' roll, Rao found something like 170,000 people on the voters' roll who had duplicate IDs, and they were distributed, 75% of them, in Mat North, Mat South, and Bulawayo. Now, you can imagine the ability of partisan voters with duplicate IDs to be able to vote in multiple ways. And thus, that audit demonstrated why the result in 2013 showed this enormous change in Matabeleland and Bulawayo. Commentators claimed this was because of the splitting of the vote. Actually, it wasn't due to the splitting of the vote. It was due to the ability to vote multiple times. And therefore, the ability of civil society and anybody to look at the voters' roll and to do an analysis of it, which cannot be tampered with. ZEC continuously claims that any access to the voters' roll will result in tampering. This is complete nonsense. The only way you can tamper with the voters' roll is if you can get into the machine that controls the voters' roll. But the copies of the voters' roll should be open to scrutiny and public scrutiny. It should be on the internet. It should be available to everybody in the way that it is in some democratic countries like South Africa. So the point I'm making is that the hurdles in front of this election are considerable. And the major point of this whole exercise between Rao and SAPES is that every election stands and falls on the outcome, what results are announced. Very rarely do we come to a position where we say, we've done the analysis on the pre-election climate, on all the technical conditions that should make for a decent election. And if they're not present, then we have to call the election foul ahead of time. Because the history we have is that we call the election foul after the time. And then, as Ibo pointed out in the beginning, then all the internationals leave, they write pious reports, and a government that is largely illegitimate because of an illegitimate election moves steadfastly from de jure to from de facto to de jure in a matter of months. This cannot happen in this election. And that's why the series of webinars, the 9 coming, are critical for understanding why a pre-election audit must lead to some kind of conclusion about the conditions. And if those conditions are unfavorable, what will be the next steps? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony. Reverend Sibanda, Hussein Sibanda, have you withdrawn?
No, I have not. Thank you so much. Well, first, thanks to Dr. Ibo and SAPES for affording this opportunity. I think it's really bringing the much needed capacity in terms of vigorous intellectual thinking about the elections before we get there. I just wanted to find out from Dr. Zamchia, what one thing could be done that could turn things around. That's my first question. But also I wanted to say, maybe we need to be, I'm sure maybe part of your series that's coming might be to say, what are the solutions? Because I think we need to bring some thought leadership into say, okay, yes, we've described the problems, we know what could happen, we see it, but really what is the solution? What one thing could be done, or several things that could be done to shift things so that this election turns out differently? And then in terms of information, I'm wondering if any research has been done to say, as we stand now, what is the reach of ZBC? What's the reach of Herald and Chronicle? Are they really important now, considering the reach of the social media? Most people are receiving information through WhatsApp, through Facebook, which is penetrating into the rural areas. So what is the reach of ZBC now? I know people are worried, let's have ZBC and so forth, but what's the alternative? Studio 7, I think at one point I remember they'd done their research and they were talking of reaching over 1 million. Maybe now it's much, much more. That was some years back. Well, how many people are reached by Studio 7? Ndebele and Shona programming. So where should people invest? Democratic forces, where should we invest in terms of, yes, it's good to push the public media to actually give space to other people, I agree, but what are the alternatives? The elections that have been won in the region, Zambia, has been more on social media, the young people being reached through social media. The work has not been on the public media stations. It has been more on social media. What will be the impact of the community radio stations that are being opened now? Maybe that's another thinking that needs to be done, to say there's so many community radio stations that are indigenous languages that are being opened. What will be their impact be like? And then in terms of, well, I'm glad that you had explained earlier on about that we shouldn't, it's good to focus on what is acceptable to the international community. But I think what would be our local threshold as Zimbabweans? What would we want to see? If the people say we want to see our election, this is the election we want. This is the kind of election we want. I don't know for ZESIN and ERRC, how much work has been done to make Zimbabweans say, this is the election we want as Zimbabweans. This is the kind of an election that we want. And as Zimbabweans, we begin to work towards it. What work has been done by these institutions? Thank you.
And thanks, Reverend Sibanda. I think you have raised two very important points. One, in addition to outlining the pathologies that are attendant to the process so far, what could be done to turn things around is certainly a topic that we want to take up. And we can also say that some of us have been looking at this, and we made reference to the idea of an international conference during which the audit will be done and at the end of which we must decide that if elections are to be held, what is the role of civic society, of Zimbabwe as a whole, the region, and the international community. My own view, prima facie, is that it's hardly likely that we will be able to turn things around in time for election, and unless we insist on some kind of internationally supervised elections. A tall order, but I can't see how we can have a free and fair election. One is reminded of 1980 elections, which were really internationally supervised to some extent. Is that a possibility? You know, we'll discuss these and other issues as we go on with this series. You raised the issue of the state media, and I wondered what was the import of your question. Do you think the state media outreach is of any use, given that state media is captured as well? And lastly, the point you make about what are the minimum conditions acceptable to Zimbabweans to go ahead with the election? These are some of the issues we want to discuss as we proceed with our series in the weeks and months ahead. But now I see Barbara's hand is up.
Oh, yeah.
Barbara, Amanda.
Yes, my
Barbara,
hand
you
was
coming
up.
now?
Oh, yeah, sure. So you
After
did
Barbara, I'll have
raise...
Amanda.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, Barbara.
Okay, so you did ask the question, what would happen if we were to get closer to the election and the conditions that we've just highlighted are still the same? My response to that is that I think it would be unwise for us to get closer to an election and still have, be talking about the same issues. Why am I saying that? I think because we need to begin to think about ways in which we can push for a more conducive environment for elections to be held. And also we need to begin to think about what we can learn from other countries, like the Kenya election that you spoke about at the beginning of the meeting. There are a lot of things that we can learn from Kenya. They didn't just wait till the last minute to address some of the issues in the electoral environment, but they started months back to actually work on the electoral environment and push for reforms. So what I would say is that we need to be very practical in terms of how we engage with this election, combining our philosophical thinking about the political environment, about the previous elections, with more practical, approaches in terms of what exactly needs to be done. Like, for instance, if we need the Electoral Act to be aligned to the 2013 Constitution, we need to push that and make sure that it is aligned and tick the boxes in terms of what exactly has been included in the amendment in the new act. So let's be practical in terms of how we approach the election. That's one thing that I would say. And also let's try and learn from other countries and also learn from history in terms of what happened in the past and how can we change. And maybe lastly, just to say that let's try and change the narrative. You see, this narrative that says the election is a foregone conclusion is not going to help motivate civil society to push for reforms. Neither is it going to help the citizens out there to go out and register to vote and to vote on election day. But it will only serve to make everybody, reluctant, or just to say, I am not going to participate in a flawed process. But as civil society actors, how do we balance highlighting the issues, the contentious issues that are in the environment, with ensuring that we continue to build that momentum, within civil society and amongst citizens for them to participate? We already know that as the registration figures for young voters is very low. So if you go to a young person and you tell the young person some of the things that we've talked about here, that young person will not be willing to register to vote, because they'll be like, oh, so if this election is going to be stolen, why should I register to vote? So how do we balance the narrative as civil society? And as civil society, how do we also collectively work together? Like, for instance, in Kenya, we had ELOG, an observation group, which is like a collection of civil society organizations, faith-based institutions coming together to collectively monitor the electoral environment election day. And we did see how this group actually was instrumental, was at the forefront of releasing the result, of tallying the results and releasing them to the public. I think it's something that we may need to think about. And lastly, maybe the issue concerning the management of the results itself. There is a lot of, we can learn a lot from Kenya in terms of how they actually managed the results process. Although, of course, towards the end of the process, we did see that somehow they stopped updating, their portal with results, and that prompted is it the Azimio coalition to then think that the election had been stolen. But I must say that system itself seemed to be transparent and accountable, and it is a welcome development that maybe as Zimbabwe we need to think about, and to say, how can we push ZAC for a more transparent and accountable results management system, so that we can, to use Pilani's pillar, so that we can also perhaps protect the votes at the end of the day. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. I'll be coming back to you at the end, as I said. Nonetheless, to ask the same question, what do we do come November, and we come to the conclusion that the conditions for free, fair, and peaceful elections are not there, that the 5 pillars that Zamchia has referred to are not in place, that, to quote Zamchia, that there is unlikely to be a free and fair election in the context of a military state, militarized ZEC. And to add the point he made, there can be no free and fair elections until and unless the coup is cured. It's something to consider at the end. I'll now call on Amanda Hammer. Amanda, welcome, and nice to see you again.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. And I just want to first of all recognize all the incredibly deep and articulate and moving inputs from all of you who've presented and commented. And, you know, being a bit far away in Scandinavia, but still in my entire body feeling, feeling what we're talking about here. But so there's a lot that's been covered, and I'm support the insights and everything. What I was I just want to bring up a few things. Okay, so the things that have been laid on the table are not unfamiliar to us. So it's not so much that we don't know and that we've yet to understand. We are more deeply understanding as we go along, and there's more to be done. And a lot of the institutions and the ones that Barbara and Ian in particular represent, and Sapis and Rao and others, we know a lot of this, we've witnessed it, we've literally seen it in our eyes. If anybody's seen the film Democrats, we've watched literally in front of our eyes what ZEC was doing in the constitutional courts, during the 2018 elections. Okay, so there's a huge amount of work to be done. Barbara, you're incredibly, I love and feel the optimism and the sort of the energy. And I think there is that, and there are more visible and more subtle ways in which to support the things that you're talking about. But what I'm going to come to more is that we know that, let's say, the international and the regional, the trans-African perspective or dimension, is that you're talking about some lessons from, learning lessons from Kenya or Zambia. But I think it's more than having to learn lessons. One can observe what they've done. I'm very interested about where the alliances are, I don't mean just within Zimbabwe, but where are regional trans-African alliances in the sense of countries that have established democratic practices, that have credibility? Is there any way in which, and who would make those moves to strengthen the alliances of those outside of Zimbabwe to whom some greater accountability by ZANU-PF, by ZEC, by the institutions that are constitutionally formed in Zimbabwe, where there is a level of accountability diametrically opposed to impunity? Because the things that have been laid on this table are known, broadly speaking, more details are needed, but the need for reforms are there, but the lack of reforms, the lack of commitment to reforms, the lack of accountability in domestically is just extraordinary. So where are there possibilities for alliances? And we know those can't be, you know, with Western countries so much, but within the continent. Where are the commitments within the continent? Where are the alliances within the continent that strong bodies inside Zimbabwe can work with and build up another kind of layer of accountability, not just during the elections, but as you say, calling this pre-election audit. That audit is part of free and fair elections, but it's one thing to do it internally, but as Barbara, you were talking about an external observation mission, but okay, can somebody talk about African alliances? Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you. We'll leave the panelists to respond to your question earlier, but unless there's someone else in the audience who wants to attend to that. But I think the point you've made is very, very important. That the red flag is up already on the Zimbabwe situation. It has been up there since 2017 and even earlier. And given that many of those in the so-called international community supported the coup in 2017, are they prepared to come to the platform now? And in the context of an acknowledgement that things have gotten worse, that the 2018 election itself defied the odds. A year after the coup, hardly a year after the coup, you're expecting a free and fair elections under a coup government. Is that crazy? And so what is to be done, not only by Zimbabweans, but by Zimbabweans in concert with the international community, with the region, with the continent, to highlight these problems that Shamshia has done so well, and to which both Barbara and Ian have responded. And to take up the point that Barbara has raised, and yourself, Amanda, and Reverend Hussein Sibanda, is anything can be done before the audit, before the elections, to turn things around? Any more comments before I call on the panelists to come in? Any more? Tony, your hand up again. Tony, is your hand up again?
Yeah, sorry to be a bore, but Amanda's put the problem on the table, and you raised it at the beginning. You said elections have to be acceptable to us, to the region, to Africa as a whole, and then to the world. Well, the problem is domestically, and I'm going to be conflictual about this, if the opposition plays fast and loose with elections, then we have a problem. Now, you can't go into an election claiming that you can win it at the same time that you say the election is going to be flawed. Now, you have to have a conditionality in that. Unless the CCC and the opposition parties look at the pre-election audit and they call it foul ahead of time, and they take a decision about what needs to happen next, then why should anyone else listen to us? Because then we go through the same game that two parties contest for an election and everybody waits to see the result. And we've just seen that in Kenya. And then everybody goes, oh gosh, that was a disaster, but it's your problem now. So unless there's clarity within Zimbabwe on this pre-election audit, why should anybody else listen to us?
Can I just clarify what I'm not suggesting that I'm suggesting that this alliance is part of working in the audit needs to be something quite wide, I would say, and get a sort of a strength and a support for it from more than just, I mean, it is an internal audit, but it surely needs allies. That's what I meant.
No, I heard you. I think that's why the idea of the international conference in November, to provide not only an audit, but also in anticipation of a qualified audit, and therefore to decide what to do in the months ahead, in the 7 months to 8 months to the election. What must be done, given that elections will be held with or without the approval of civic society, of the political parties. ZANU-PF will proceed. The Zimbabwean state will proceed with the elections, come what may, not least when they expect, as they've done in the past, that they're going to win, in inverted commas. So any more comments? I'll take 3 more and then I'll go back to the panelists. Anybody else? Joan, you want to come in? John Brigio? Joan? Ian Makone? Piers?
Arnold. Let's ask Arnold.
Arnold won't talk. Arnold won't talk. Fine. In that case, I will now go back to the panels and ask. I'll begin with Ian Goredema. Your last words, not only about what we have discussed, which is really the negative aspects, the pathologies of the Zimbabwean situation, but also what you think can be done up to the audit, at least in November, to turn things around. Ian.
Thanks a lot. It is a really hard question because the things that need to be done are very difficult. And for me, like I said earlier on, in the absence of political will to deliver a clean election, then there's not much that any civil society or other stakeholders can do, because at the end of the day, the politicians, being the primary stakeholders in an election, are the ones that are totally responsible for determining the quality of the electoral processes we can enjoy, as well as allowing the commission to do its work unhindered or unimpaired. And so if politicians decide to get in the way of the commission in delivering a credible election, in delivering credible electoral processes, it's very difficult for anyone else to do anything, because at the end of the day, they wield the power and have access to the law enforcement agencies, who they can instruct to behave one way or the other, and in a manner that then obviously entrenches or the rights and the enjoyment of rights, civil political rights by other electoral contestants. So the things that are required, for a government to play ball with electoral reforms, obviously the burden I'll put is squarely on, again, the opposition, to say what kind of political pressure are they able to come up with? Because the things that we are talking about, having an audit of electoral processes and then expecting that audit to then determine whether we have an election or not, it can only be done by people with the adequate muscle, intellectually, financial, the people behind them, to be able to send a strong and clear and unambiguous message to the powers that be, that you can't proceed with an election because you've not met A, B, C, D criteria. So it's easy to have an audit, but unless those that are conducting the audit have that kind of power, have that kind of influence, have that kind of muscle, then still that audit will not necessarily achieve the desired or required effects or impacts on the course of our elections. So I don't want to sound like I'm a pessimist, by saying that, but I'm just saying, when you look at our electoral processes so far, between 2018 and now, in as much as we've not made significant strides, but yes, there are marginal, small improvements that we begin to see. Look at the Census and Statistical Act. That amendment came through because of sustained pressure from civics to say, please move forward the Census process, so that at least we can allow for the boundary delimitation to happen and be concluded within the timeframes that are given by the Constitution. Small gains, small victories, you may think they are inconsequential, but I would believe with the kind of muscle that we currently have, we have the power to be able to impact or to on incremental changes to the process, to the electoral law, to the behavior of the political actors. That is well within the power that we currently have. I need someone to convince me that we have power for a revolution, because that's an entirely different ballgame altogether. You really need different tactics, different muscle. You really need to have the people behind you, and all of them, or the majority of them, you know. So for me, I think we also need to take stock of what we are capable of doing. Yes, we want heaven on earth. We want the best electoral processes, but we also need to be very, I think, honest with ourselves to say, so what power do we have? What are we able to achieve with that power? And then be able to then realistically expect certain things to happen. So this is what I throw back to the meeting and say, if we could get, you know, any reflections on that, that would be nice also. What are we realistically able to achieve with the power that we have, with the resources that we have access to? Thank you.
No, I will throw a question back at you, Ian Korodema.
Yes.
Not in your personal capacity, but as Zessen. What do you have been on the scene for a long time, Zessen?
Yes, we have.
And obviously you are witness to what we're discussing as Zessen. What have you considered as the possible options in the light of what has been said, in the light of what you know to be the obstacles to a free and fair election? Or are you as Zessen just going into the next election as you have done before? What are the conditions? Right. So you're just prepared for the next election, come what may, or you have other considerations? Yes.
So I think allow me to explain the role that we play as Zessen, because there are things that we are not, and there are things that we are. So we are a domestic election observation group with sole responsibility, and if you look at our mission statement, it outlines this. We are responsible for providing sustained oversight over electoral processes. Now, when we do that, what we are doing is that we are gathering the evidence to then say to what extent is the election management body and the other electoral stakeholders adhering to set electoral codes of conduct, as well as the electoral law itself. And once we gather that evidence, our role is to disseminate that information, not just disseminating the information, but our role is to then utilize the information for lobbying and advocacy purposes, so that at least our action points, our advocacy points are not informed by opinions or preferences, but they are evidence-based, to say this is where we are falling short, this is what we need to work on. Now, many stakeholders are not too happy with such a strategy, because they expect you to be able to overturn an election result, to be able to move mountains that you can't move. Our contribution is very clear. Once we do that, we expect political actors to take up our recommendations, then be able to galvanize, their supporters towards the course of action, having been informed on exactly what pitfalls or what shortfalls are there in electoral processes. So this is not a job for one organization or one institution. Really, they are collective and concerted efforts that all the stakeholders in the country must be seized with. There is a unique contribution of political parties. There is something that if they don't do, there's nothing that civil society may be able to do. So if they don't do their bit, civil society will not be able to achieve much. So we have limitations as to what we can do as organizations, and we are very clear about that. So this is my answer to you, to say apart from continually looking at how we can improve our electoral process and suggesting the best way forward, helping with the adequate research and comparative studies on how others are handling their business, there's only so much we can do. Like, for instance, I gave you an example. We require the Constitution sections 187 for the Traditional Leaders Act, Ethics and Integrity Committee. We also want 210 to be operationalized, which allows for citizens to have a recourse whenever they feel their rights have been violated by those in the uniformed forces. So apart from that, if that is not there, you can imagine what can Zessen do against the military? What can they do? We don't have much power against that. We are also wanting these other points to be in place, so that at least we can also leverage on existing law to be able to then move things forward. So that's my long and winding answer. And I think it also expresses the frustration that we also have about the limited capacity that we have in influencing some of these processes. Like, for instance, I've given you, we started in 2018 working on pushing for amendments. You can imagine, in the absence of the executive playing ball, then really all those efforts will come to naught. And there's nothing we can do about that. We can't force the Attorney General to craft or to draft a law this way or that way. We really can't. So that these are some of the I think frustrations that we feel about the current political environment that currently obtains, the culture that is there, and like I'm saying, these efforts to improve the laws and practice in elections, it cannot be one advocacy group or one civil society group working on it alone. It needs concerted effort from different stakeholders, a multiplicity of stakeholders. All needs to put their hands on deck and do their bit, which is why, on to the point that Barbara made earlier on, why we said sometimes it looks like we shoot ourselves in the foot whenever we then write off a process and then at the end of the day, then decide to participate in it. Because at the end of the day, you will have one section of stakeholders dismissing an electoral process to the point where all those people that we want to participate in the interface with the voter registration, with the actual voting, will feel it's useless to do so. So we still want them to participate. But when then we make these sweeping conclusions, then you can imagine, I'm just speaking on how I perceive that other segment which sits on the fence, which decides not to participate, how they feel. They feel it's of no use. So I don't know how we can then strike the balance to say, yes, your vote matters. Yes, you must participate in voter registration and also in voting. And then at the same time, continue to call on these weaknesses that we currently see in the existing electoral law and in practice by both the ZEC and also the political contestants. So it's a fine balance that needs to be achieved, I know, but it has to be achieved so that at least we can then decide on whether we are going forward or we are not going forward at all. And I remember, Ibo, in years past, we once had a conversation about whether it's even useful to have elections. So again, it's a difficult question, because if you don't have them, then what alternative do you have? These are difficult questions that we're grappling with. And for me, I think the major issue is whatever option we get to decide on after that audit, after the all stakeholders conference that you mentioned, it needs to be backed up by a strategy that is well resourced, so that at least we can be able to achieve the pressure that we want to achieve. Otherwise, then boycotting a process is of no use if we are not going to then make signals that can be interpreted or understood or provide the kind of pressure that is required. So for me, that's the difficult balancing act that needs to be pursued.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks very much. I just want to assure you that we're together in this. It's not just Zessen on its own.
Yes, thank you.
But although it's a journey that Zessen must join us as we go forward. And it's clear that we cannot continue to allow history to repeat itself with every election, and pretend everything is normal and it's business as usual. We have to. This is the whole purpose of this discussion, is to try and put an end to this impunity, this mess. We're the only odd man out in the region as a country, disgraceful. Okay, Barbara, same question to you. How do you see the ARC moving on this journey towards the audit and beyond?
Okay, that's fine. Thank you for the question, and maybe just to say thank you to Ian for for responding to your question in such a passionate manner. As the ERC, there is a lot that we are doing, but I wanted to respond to your question, the initial question that you raised, to say, what are we going to do? What would we do if, what are we going to do when we get to November and the conditions are still the same? And I wanted to say that perhaps the framing for the question should be what I propose. What can we do to ensure that we change things so that when we get to November, we are able to count or to point at some of the changes that would have happened, so that we don't have a situation where we are discussing the same issues. In response to that, to the question that I've just crafted, I would like to say that civil society, it seems like civil society's voice is not loud enough to push the state to act. I think that civil society currently has been acting in silos, and it's time we decided to come together as civil society. That way, we'll be able to counter, some of the actions of the state. Like, for instance, as it is, Ibo, I heard you talk about the incident that happened at your offices. We had a similar incident where one of our staff members' vehicle was burnt, at his house. And this is because as civil society, we are not acting together. We do not even know what is happening, to either staff in other organizations or to other organizations. And the staff and the state has been able to, is targeting us individually because we are not working together. So I think the first thing that we need to do is to figure out how we can make our voice as civil society loud enough for the state to act. And then the second thing is the issues that we highlighted during this call are not new. These are issues that were highlighted after the 2018 elections by various observer mission groups. We continue to highlight those things: the militarization of the state, militarization of ZAC, amongst other issues. Those are issues that we already know of. But what can we do? What are the low-hanging fruits? Where can we have quick wins as civil society so that when we get to November, we do not cry about the low registration figures, right? For instance, that's a low-hanging fruit. There is continuous voter registration. The continuous voter registration exercise is ongoing, right? So why can't we as civil society come to hanging fruit? When we get to November, we'll be saying, oh, the figures have increased. What are the issues amongst in our audit of the electoral environment? Can we highlight as low-hanging fruits and chase those so that 3 months from now, we're able to point at those issues as successes and we are not at the same level? So that's, to me, something that we need to do. But back to your question in terms of what ERC has been doing or what ERC intends to do, we have been doing a lot in terms of ensuring, pushing for a conducive environment for free and fair elections. We have been pushing for the independence of ZAC, highlighting some of the issues with the commission. We have been at the forefront of highlighting some of the issues with some of the problems with the voters' roll. And I think some of you may have read our report with regards to that. And we have also, put pressure on ZAC to actually make sure that they avail the voters' roll to the public because that is the right. We have also been pushing, trying to ramp up, our voter registration statistics, taking young people to voter registration centers. We utilize the voter registration blitz. We continue to utilize the continuous voter registration processes so that the figures for voter registration are increased. We continue to educate citizens on key electoral processes. We are forging alliances across Africa. We have forged alliances with civil society organizations in Kenya, in South Africa, in Uganda, in South Africa, and in other countries where we are trying to learn lessons from them to say, what can we do? How can we get some of the issues that are happening in country amplified in the region and across the continent? So that's those are some of the things that we are doing. We are also working with political parties, building their capacity on various key, political processes. Like recently, we were working with assisting political parties to understand the delimitation process. So I'm not going to say a lot more about what we are doing, but those are some of the things that we are doing. And I think as civil society, we also need, as we talk about these issues, we also need to celebrate some of the things that we've managed to do, some of our successes. That will give us fresh energy. That will give us energy that we are progressing. But if we do not, if we forget the narrative that says we have done something, we have won, we have gained something in our journey, we will then get tired. So I think maybe even as we frame our discussions moving forward, let's try and balance the narrative and change the narrative. I think I'm saying this for the second time, but trying to balance the narrative that says the environment is not conducive, but also how do we try and get civil society to have energy? Because as it is, people seem to be tired. How do we energize civil society and how do we energize the voters? I think I'll end for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. It's a long journey. We're together with the ERC, with Zessen. Don't get tired, Barbara. All of us don't get tired. I'm sorry to hear about the incident at ERC where the car was burnt. Yeah, we had our gazebo restaurant burnt down last week, Wednesday night, in a suspected arson. Yes, that is the story. And
sorry about that.
Yeah, and we just fear that as some chair said earlier, the campaign of violence, we fear it will get worse as we proceed to elections. And so, last but not least, Philani Zamchia.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. I think we should really appreciate the work that civil society organizations are trying to do, and also think tanks that you preside over. For the sake of time, I think that Tony's issue, firstly, about debating about the 2018 court judgment is very, very important. I hope that as the series go on, you will be able to unpack that, but also looking at other jurisdictions like Malawi, like Kenya, and really see what was the issue and the independence of the judiciary and so forth, though it can be reversed, but I think there are lessons that can be learned, because I was talking about integrity of these institutions. And just to say that, there's this common narrative in the social media. That's why I want this thing to be really debated, that the petition that the MDC put in the court had no V11 forms. You create popular narratives that are myth and then they end up like the truth. But if you actually go and look at Annexure A of that court petition, there was a symbol of some V11 forms, But what Luke Malawa, the Chief Justice, wanted was an analysis of those V11 forms that had been submitted against the V11 forms that were in the ballot boxes. So that was going to be the primary source of evidence, according to the Chief Justice. So having the V11 forms, according to the court, was not going to solve the problem. I see Ian Makoni is here. It was not going to solve the problem because of how these institutions lack integrity at the moment, like the judicial. They wanted the analysis of the V11 forms that are in Annexure A of that application versus the V11 forms that were in the ballot boxes, of which those V11 forms were in custody of ZEC. And there was no shift of evidentiary burden of proof. I leave it there, but Tony, I think take that up with the lawyers. I'm using my limited political science approach. Then secondly, the thing I referenced about state media is very important because it taxpayers' money. Radio Zimbabwe still reaches out far and wide in the rural hinterland. on whether people have power. If you look at all the statistics of any surveys, majority of the people in Zimbabwe are not happy. And what is not being utilized is people power. That is revolution from below to some extent. There is no one trying to drive and organize people from below, but the majority of the people are not happy. The narratives about trying to be positive, I respectively disagree. They bring to practitioners, they belong to politicians, they belong to civil society. They can't belong to intellectuals like us. I remember in 2013 when I was having a conversation with people around Morgan Tsvangirai, they were telling me, no, we need to tell Mudara, like the old men, the positive narratives. But then when I had an interview with Morgan Tsvangirai in 2017, he was very clear that there are certain things that you can't hide. You can't go around and say that people are insulated when they are not. Look at the Zim Rights report. The people themselves know that they are not insulated, the answers that they were not giving. So it's beyond a technicist approach. It needs a much broader, big idea. Amanda Hammer, I agree with you that there's need for alliances for democratic transition, but there's also need for alliances against autocracy. Look at Swaziland or the other African countries that I've mentioned. And these global issues that I've talked about, inclusion, it's also about citizenship. It's also about voter registration, information integrity, insulation, irreversibility. They are local, they are regional, they are international. So I think that for tonight, perhaps I can end there. And thank you very much once again for the opportunity.
Oh, really. I can't thank you all three enough, in particular for the manner in which all three of you have raised the flag, beginning with Zamchia, whose 5 pillars we are going to use as we move forward: information, inclusion, insulation, integrity, as he emphasized, and irreversibility. These are very important. They're also signposts as we do the audit, as we move forward. We take the point made passionately by some that it's not too late to turn things around, and that one of the purposes of this series is to see really how, in addition to conscientizing Zimbabweans about their rights, democratic rights, is to see how they can ensure on their part that we have a free and fair election next year. It's not too late. It's never too late until it is late. Thank you very much. Again, Tejara, Zamchia, Barbara, and Ian, thank you very much. And all of you who have joined us, Amanda and others, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Avoti tango ekomaka, kaina komi moto, ona